Breaking news from a federal judge in Boston, the latest of several to say the Trump administration could be violating court orders. The New York Times came out with a story shortly before airtime. A Burmese immigrant apparently put on a plane bound for South Sudan or Myanmar. The government's lawyer claims the second. The man's lawyer says the first. Judge Brian Murphy threatening to hold officials in contempt, warning the administration it had apparently violated an order he issued in April, barring this person's deportation without first giving him time to challenge his removal and ordering officials to locate the plane. Quoting now from the Times courtroom account, quote, during the hearing, Judge Murphy ordered a lawyer for the Justice Department, Elianis N. Perez, to notify everyone involved in the flight to South Sudan, from the pilot of the plane to officials in the Department of Homeland Security, that they could face criminal contempt sanctions if his ruling was not followed. He also instructed Ms. Perez to find out exactly where the plane was and whether it could be turned around mid-flight. Now, Ms. Perez told the judge she did not know where the plane was. More now on this man's case and that of another person from Vietnam who apparently suffered the same fate. CNN's Priscilla Alvarez and Jeff Zeleny are with us now. There's a lot that is murky about this, and we're just figuring out, Priscilla. But what do we know about why these migrants were allegedly deported despite the judge's order?
Well, John, all of this unfolded very quickly over the course of the day. We initially saw those court filings earlier this afternoon, but this is something that began on Monday and really took off on Tuesday. Here's what the court documents say. There are declarations here from attorneys from of the Burmese national that you're referring to there and a Vietnamese national. But they say, John, that there could be 10 others who were on this flight, they say, to South Sudan. Now, in the case of the Burmese national, what the attorney for that national says is that on Monday, he was notified that he was going to be deported to South Sudan. He's not proficient in English. He was advised or he was notified by ICE while he was in detention of this without an interpreter. And this really set off a chain of events of his attorneys trying to figure out why he would be sent to South Sudan. He did have a removal order, but to his own country, not to another one. Now, his attorney says that she set up an appointment to meet with him virtually this morning. When he checked the detainer locator this morning, that's essentially the detention system to see where people are, he was no longer there. And when she emailed ICE, they said the officer responded, quote, South Sudan, when she asked where he was removed to. So you can see why there is so much confusion as to where these detainees who just yesterday were in the detention system are now no longer there. Now, the attorneys are trying to scramble to figure this out because even though some of these migrants did have removal orders and could be deported, the question here is where were they deported to? Because if they are sent to a third country, in this case South Sudan, then they would have had to go through a process. They would have had to be notified. They would have had an ability to contest their removal to this country. Now, all of that appears to not have happened, which is why we are seeing all of this unfold in these court filings and in the courtroom. I will also tell you, John, the Department of Homeland Security has not publicly confirmed a flight to South Sudan, a place that has been on the cusp of civil war and where the U.S. advises Americans not to travel to because of the ongoing armed conflict there. So certainly a scramble is still unfolding at this hour, John, as attorneys try to figure out where people who they knew were yesterday are suddenly nowhere to be found in the U.S. system.
Yeah, it is confusing. So, Jeff, has the Trump administration made any comment on these alleged deportations? Because this is obviously not the first time they have found themselves in this sort of a face-off with a judge.
As of now, John, tonight, no. The White House has not commented on this broadly. The administration has not either, DHS. And you're right, it is a very familiar story. As Priscilla was just laying out there, we have heard this before. If this sounds familiar, it is. The countries are different. The locations are different. To Priscilla's point there at the end, South Sudan is on the cusp of a civil war, and there is a travel warning against visiting there. So that certainly is one point here. But no, the administration is not responding to this. They simply, this is one more example of how the immigration procedures are operating in the shadows in many respects. But the events of the courtroom in Boston that were relayed by the New York Times and in the official record show that the judges, one more judge, is increasingly becoming exasperated and angry with the Trump administration, with the DOJ lawyers for their responses or lack of responses. And we're told there is another hearing tomorrow to get more responses to this. So this is very much an ongoing story, John.
All right, we will learn more, no doubt, in the coming hours. Priscilla Alvarez, Jeff Zeleny, we really appreciate your reporting on this. With us now is Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat from Connecticut who sits on the Judiciary and Armed Services Committee, among others. Senator Blumenthal, very nice to see you. So, look, there's many levels to this story. If there was a plane with migrants sent to South Sudan, deporting people to South Sudan, what's your response to that? Sending people who aren't from South Sudan, we think, to this nation which is on the verge of a civil war?
If those individuals were on a plane sent to South Sudan, it seems a violation of the court order. Judge Murphy ought to be really angry. His order has been violated, and he ought to consider a contempt of court motion. And no doubt the plaintiffs are considering it now, but very seriously, violation of court orders ought to be treated with the utmost of sanctions, because otherwise the law is dead letter.
Court order aside, and I'll come back to that in a second, why do you think South Sudan as a nation to deport people to if they are not in fact Sudanese?
John, it's inexplicable, except that so much of the lawlessness occurring in connection with these deportations is cruel and dumb. And so the only explanation could be that it was a way of somehow punishing them for being illegally in the country, to send them to a place where they could be easily subject to persecution, torture, killing. And that is the fate, by the way, that they've also imposed on Afghan allies who helped our servicemen and women in Afghanistan, as well as protecting diplomats who are in this country on temporary protected status. And they are now, the administration, threatening to eliminate that TPS status, send them back to the Taliban where they have targets on their back. Cruel and dumb, really inexplicable.
If there is a subset of people that are easier to vet, who we have a better understanding of who they are and what they're going to do when they come here, they're going to receive preference.
CNN's Larry Madowo now digs into the reality of what's going on in South Africa.
White South Africans, many of them farmers, enter the American dream. Some, too young to know, they've also entered an international firestorm.
Welcome. Welcome to the United States of America.
The U.S. government says it's taking in these refugees fleeing alleged racial discrimination at home.
That's why they've opened the door for them.
Yes, and they don't fit that bill. Those people who have fled are not being persecuted. The American government has got the wrong end of the stick here.
South Africa's president has come to the U.S. to set the record straight and is expected to meet President Donald Trump Wednesday, hoping to reset the two countries' relationship. It was his signing of a controversial land seizure law in January that invoked Trump's wrath, allowing the state to take unused farmland without compensation if deemed just, equitable, and in the public interest. South Africa's majority black population still owns just a small percentage of farms more than 30 years after apartheid officially ended, while most are owned by the white minority. There were 36 murders at farms between April and December last year, but only 7 of the victims were farmers, according to police data. But President Trump calls it a, quote, genocide against white farmers.
They're being killed, and we don't want to see people be killed. It's a genocide that's taking place.
The accusation, partly stemming from this apartheid-era song, made popular again by far-left opposition leader Julius Malema.
Kill the poor, the farmer.
But AfriForum, the conservative white Afrikaners lobby group, won't explicitly say there is a white genocide.
There's a call for genocidal call. People are being killed and people are being tortured. We need to prevent this from going further.
AfriForum is described by the US-based Southern Poverty Law Center as a white nationalist group. They have the ear of the US administration, but they're not leaving South Africa.
At AfriForum, we say our future is in Africa because our ancestors came here more than 300 years ago.
South African-born entrepreneur Elon Musk has fanned the accusations against his homeland, frustrating locals.
I think they are lying. There's no genocide in here. Elon Musk is overhyping the situation. There's no such as genocide.
We mustn't mischaracterize things as a genocide. There's no mass expropriation of land taking place in South Africa. There's no genocide taking place.
Musk reportedly wants approvals for his companies to operate in South Africa.
Is Elon Musk invited when you have that face-to-face meeting?
Well, I don't know. They will determine whether Elon Musk is part of it or not.
President Ramaphosa hopes to mend the rift and convince Trump to attend the G20 summit in Johannesburg in November. Larry Madowo, CNN, Nairobi.